Welcome to the Rising Entrepreneurs Podcast, where we feature top founders and entrepreneurs and their journey. Now, let's get started with the show.
All right, welcome everyone. John Corkin here, the host of the show. And every week I talk to smart CEOs, founders, and entrepreneurs of all kinds of companies. Check out our archives, Netflix, Kinko's, Activation Blizzard, LendingTree, OpenTable. We've got lots of great individuals that you want to go check out those past episodes. I'm also the co-founder of Rise 25, where we help connect B2B business owners to their ideal prospects. And our guest here today, I'm so excited to have. Her name is Carrie Santos. She's the Chief Executive Officer of Entrepreneurs Organization, which is a global business network of 15,000, I think it might be 16,000 plus leading entrepreneurs, 200 plus chapters around the world. I've been privileged to be a member of EO for not too long, and it's an amazing organization. But prior to joining EO, Carrie's got an amazing background. She worked 8 years at the American Red Cross. She also spent about 10 years at the State Department, and she also has a PhD in political science and was a Fulbright Scholar to Poland as communism collapsed. So we're going to ask about all of those different various experiences. And as someone who worked in government before getting into entrepreneurship, I love the connections and I love the conversation. So this episode, of course, is brought to you by Rise 25 Media, where we help B2B businesses to get clients, referrals, and strategic partnerships with done-for-you podcasts and content marketing. Go to rise25media.com to learn more about it. All right, Carrie, so excited to have you here today. We've got these kind of shared experiences. We got the Bay Area, we got government, we got EO and entrepreneurship. So we got a lot to talk about, but I want to take you back first to March of 2020. You're leading this organization of, I think it was about 14,000 members worldwide of entrepreneurs, running a zillion different companies. And here comes COVID. And I went through that experience, and I'd love to know from your perspective, you know, what you were thinking and what you did as this major crisis, one of the biggest we've ever seen, came down the pike, affecting all of your members.
So for us, it started as a regional event, very much in mainland China and Wuhan. And that part of the event was kind of familiar to me because it reminded me of some of my work for international disaster response from the American Red Cross. And like I knew things about, coordinating calls and having your lead person on the ground. And it was tricky, and we were very, very worried about our members. But the members and the staff in China were just doing amazing work trying to find out who needed what, how did they need it. And at that point, we were actually helping members mobilize masks and other protective equipment to go into China. So that felt very familiar. And okay, how are we going to help that region? Around the early dates in March that you mentioned was when it became global. We saw it kind of move a little bit to Italy. We were like, okay, this is coming. But when it became something for all of us, not like watching over there or helping over there, it was quite different. Nothing I'd ever really dealt with to this degree. We had to decide to cancel a university in Sydney. I think I 4 days before.
Yeah, a couple of people that were like on their way there.
People were already there, so that was quite difficult to decide, to figure out how to roll out that communication, how quickly to make it. And luckily, we have EO staff all over the world. So we have our staff members based in Australia who are giving us, their best data source, because it can be hard from further away to just, you don't want to rely on just your government, but they were giving us, okay, well, there was this thing in these hospitals in these cities, and watching that trend right there on the ground was extremely helpful. That information versus like just the WHO really, really helped to see that medical staff were getting hit in Australia, and hospitals were having trouble responding because too many of their doctors were sick. And that gave us a lot of fear that even though they have a really strong healthcare system, they weren't going to be able to manage. And I think most of you remember Tom Hanks and his wife got sick. I think that happened the day after we decided. And I was like, okay, I think we made the right decision, but it would help people to understand. And we literally went from being a business that I'd say was 98% in person and like 2% online to being 100% online. And that massive switch, nobody thought was even possible. Up until then, we had lots of debates. Oh, you can't do EO online. Oh, you can't do it virtual. It's all about human connection. And oh, let's think about some pilots. And we were like thinking about what pilots we were going to do. And then boom, the whole organization was in a pilot. And it's amazing.
Yeah. And from my perspective, I know you jumped into a lot of education, a lot of webinars, a lot of teleseminars, a lot of just sharing of information. And I imagine that was evolving, or was there any sort of roadmap to follow?
Right. So we had one full-time person whose job was called virtual learning before COVID. Now I'd say like all of us, our job is virtual learning, but there was one person who that was their full-time job. And so I think it was, no, there wasn't a roadmap at all. It was very much what's next, and keeping the member front and center. And luckily seeing what they were doing in China helped us know. So knowing that businesses were going to be in crisis because they already were, finding different ways to get coaching, crisis material to businesses. How do you manage your cash? How do you stress test? How can we get you a virtual coach for your business right now? That helped seeing what the members needed a couple months ahead in China and thinking about what would be good ways to disseminate that same kind of information.
Yeah. So talk about, some of the different experience that you'd had. You mentioned you were at the American Red Cross and the State Department. So you dealt with crises before, but nothing like this before, I imagine. So, in what ways did that help prepare you for this experience, or did it at all?
Did a little bit in that when crisis is your day to day, you have a tempo and a pace. So I felt very comfortable with the tempo and the pace. And that there's like a daily communication need. You need to like once a day give your update, once a day, give the headline. So we kind of quickly set up an internal architecture of information that I was familiar with in other work. What we didn't have were people who already knew how to do that job. Like, so we had regular communications people, but not people who knew like how you build like a daily update. Yeah, it's not too hard, but so some of those things really did help. And the confidence I had that, okay, you just have to start to set up some normal processes, have, decision-making at a certain time of day, get the right people there. What was different, I'd never done any of this with a member board. So I have no idea. I'd like to go back in my calendar and check the number of board meetings we did during COVID. It was like, I don't know, quadruple the number, some crazy amount, because we're a membership organization. You always need the members involved and aware and giving their feedback and sharing. So we just I think we were on a weekly meeting with the whole board, but then smaller groups all week. So that part was a little intense of being right. Okay, we need another presentation for the board, another presentation to kind of keep the whole organization moving along, not just like the back office, but keeping all the members informed was a really heavy part of that.
Right. Now, in many ways, you were the perfect person for this role at this moment in time, even though I'm sure, that wasn't the reason you were hired, that sole reason in anticipation of there being a global pandemic. But I mean, going back in your career, you started your career, you were a Fulbright Scholar in Poland during the fall of communism, and you traveled around behind the Iron Curtain during the USSR. What was that experience like?
You're right. It's a little bit like that where you have to negotiate every step. There's no playbook for how to live in an ending communist country. Those systems were kind of crumbling apart. So figuring out how to negotiate anything was really a big part of survival. So I was given as a student in Poland, as a Fulbright student, I was given a meat ration card, which is like a card this big and a little flimsy piece of very cheap paper. And I figured out that the best thing to do with my meat ration card, because meat wasn't anything I was going to prepare, I would give it to the administrator of the university who was like responsible for my paperwork, kind of like the secretary. I'm like, here, do you want my meat ration card? And that got me pretty far. And I also like figured out how to rent an apartment, which wasn't allowed. But sort of through a friend of a friend, they're not supposed to do anything capitalist like that, but I did, and I got like a 3-bedroom flat because, nobody had no one would need a small place. So that was kind of fun. A lot of like constant negotiation of how do you do your next step.
How does being in that world where there's no entrepreneurship, how does that inform what you do now as the executive director, CEO of this 16,000 member entrepreneurship that is around the globe espousing the virtues of entrepreneurship?
So the thing is, there's entrepreneurship everywhere. I don't think there's any part of the globe that has ever been able to eradicate entrepreneurship. It's constantly there. I mean, my gosh, in communism, the black market for everything, but like the currency market, like you will always find people who are figuring out what are the gaps in any economic system and how to fill them. And the more you have a system that's controlling, the more gaps there are. So the entrepreneur, like every person living in a communist country was an entrepreneur because they would basically figure out what goods and services they had access to and how to trade them for what they needed. I probably learned more there than anywhere.
Wow.
Another interesting example is after a disaster. So, I was part of natural disaster responses for American Red Cross, and you would see how quickly an individual could set up a stand that was selling anything. And I mean, just it happens before any international relief, national relief comes in. You have individuals figuring out how to get what you can sell, what goods are available, how to take the debris and start selling it off because some of it's useful. That spirit always inspired me watching, like a single mom in the Philippines. I'm thinking of Typhoon Haiyan. We would have a program in American Red Cross to help them with really, really small cash grant that they could turn into a business. And this woman bought a used vehicle and she started using it to get the downed cocoa trees and sell them. And we'd come back 2 months later, 3 months later, and she'd have 4 vehicles. Like she just grew her business out of anything. And watching that human spirit where people take a difficult situation and realize that there is a way to help connect who needs what and how to grow in that setting. There's always people who can do that.
Yeah. And elaborate on that a little bit further, because I know we were chatting beforehand and you said that it was really your experience at the American Red Cross, more so than your experience at the State Department that really got you more interested in working with entrepreneurs.
Yes, we were very lucky that the types of donations we would receive from American Red Cross gave us the ability to ask the tough questions about what works well, what doesn't work well, what can we experiment with. You can't just sort of rest on, we're going to give people pots and a blanket. Yes, you can, but how could we do more? How could we do better? So often we were partnering with entrepreneurs locally on how to just do better one, how to help them help their economies and their communities recover, and how to do better. We had an interesting program in Nairobi where we were partnering with entrepreneurs who were setting up smart smoke detectors for the low-income slums. So a fire is the biggest problem that will happen. There's no way that the fire department will get there. A fire will just destroy hundreds of people's homes very quickly. And so these entrepreneurs had figured out how to create really, really cheap smoke detectors that could set off alarms through multiple blocks at once. And so then you don't get people in a vulnerable situation by losing all their property. You save it up front where they're able to put the fire out. So the ingenuity involved in thinking, how do we make a difference for people who don't have a lot of resources? That kind of thinking was super inspiring to me. And when the opportunity to come to EO and work with entrepreneurs around the globe solving problems presented itself, I was all in.
Fascinating. One of the things that's struck me about EO is its unique organizational structure. And I imagine it relates in a sense to what you said with American Red Cross, much more so than obviously federal government, more of a top-down organization, very centralized. EO is so incredibly decentralized.
Right.
And it's taken a little while for me to wrap my head around that. As an organization, so much power to the local level. So talk a little bit about that structure and how it shapes the work that you do.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I'm glad you picked up on it because a lot of our members are really familiar with corporate structures like this, right? And so you have this feeling that EO must be similar, but in fact, we are a very decentralized network. And I think that's how we get the best ideas, that there's no EO jail, there's no EO like boss, like you can experiment and try everything. We have 15,000 innovators, we have 200 centers of innovation chapter wise, and it's like a network effect. It brings out it's a market, it brings out all the best ideas, and I think that's what makes it the very best. What people don't realize is the Red Cross being a volunteer network, it's primarily volunteer run all around the world, 20 million volunteers, and it runs the same way, decentralized. There's nobody in charge, so you have to corral people to be interested in your approach. You have to persuade them that it's good, and that, the best ideas can run forward. If you have, I just thought that was a beautiful part of the Red Cross Red Crescent movement, that people were just contributing their time and their talent for a greater purpose. And the fact that EO has the same of, how we can globally have that really local footprint, which is the best. You're offering the best because it meets the local needs, and then still collaborate in a network. It's really amazing.
Yeah, must have been very familiar to you, having come from that previous type of structure. I want to ask you about, as an organization, EO is involved in a lot of different initiatives, global issues, sustainability issues. It's got involvement at the UN level. Before I get to that, though, I want to ask you about one experience. You'd been at the State Department, went to the American Red Cross, and then you had some friends who were back at the State Department, and they said, "Hey, this will be fun. Come on back. You come work here." And so you went and you took a job as head of refugee admissions in September of 2016.
Policy. I wasn't head of refugee admissions, but I was helping on the policy side. Yeah.
Got it. Okay. But still, in that area, of course, a couple of months later, the Trump administration comes in, and it must have been a bit of a turbulent time, kind of navigating those waters and figuring out what you were supposed to do and what you weren't supposed to do, with various different court rulings coming down.
Yeah, the speed of change at the beginning of the Trump administration was like nothing I'd ever experienced. And again, in many government roles, we're working in a crisis setting very quickly, like, airlifting things and quickly moving with a war. But what we were dealing with at the beginning of the Trump administration, where they were very set on rolling out certain policy initiatives, we would hear about them on the news. We found out that there was going to be what people labeled a Muslim ban pretty much on the news. And then you're trying to parse through the statements and figure out, okay, what am I supposed to do tomorrow? And especially when they shut off certain countries from coming to the US, it's a very, very complicated process for us working on refugee admissions, because there are people all around the world who are in a pipeline to travel from here to there. So let's say you have 3 stops to get from Kenya to the US, people are in that pipeline. If you turn it off and they're stuck in Belgium, you have to figure out what to do with them. So we had never shut down the refugee admissions program before. We basically had to figure out, is there a knob and how do you turn it off? A lot of discussion with everyone in Homeland Security and people responsible for airport security and airline officials, trying to let them know what the US policy was. And then all of those decisions were challenged in the court. So we would have the radio on, trying to figure out what was the court ruling going to be. And the next day, were we supposed to turn it back on if that's what the court ruled? And how would we turn it back on? And a very unique situation in a city like Washington, D.C., where we kind of know how to get things moving in the government. But that up and down, twist and turn was really fascinating. And the pace was incredible, just trying to keep up with what was coming out in the news every day to know what our jobs were supposed to be.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about how entrepreneurs are getting involved on global issues, sustainability issues, got the UN sustainability goals. What do you see as the role of entrepreneurs in global issues?
Well, what's really amazing is how entrepreneurs bring a different mindset to problem solving. The large organizations, international organizations like the UN and governments that give out a lot of aid, they really think at this big macro level. Okay, $20 million is going here, $1 billion is going there, and you can give it to governments, and it's going to trickle down, and eventually we'll get a road. And maybe you will, maybe you won't. Actors like entrepreneurs are so much better able to look at the gap and find the solutions for a gap. So like supply chain issues, things, getting to the last mile. Those are things that big organizations don't know how to do, that come like second nature to an entrepreneur. So what's really cool having this framework, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, is very open, clear. There are things that any business can look at and decide is relevant to them, like clean water or education or empowering girls and women. And you can look at your own business and decide where you might have an impact. In fact, actually, all entrepreneurs have an impact. I'm going to get it wrong. I think it's SDG 8 is on creating sustainable jobs. All entrepreneurs are doing that right now. And it's jobs where you're treating your workers and your staff equitably. Like everybody in EO is doing that because they're on their own journey with values. So having a way for members to see that they either, already just by creating jobs are contributing to alleviating poverty in the world, or something where maybe they'll get more interested, or they're seeing about how to adjust their supply chain to, help clean water or some other issue. It's really great that it's open for you to see. And then what we're seeing in EO is our members are talking about what they're doing in their own businesses and inspiring other members to make other changes that might be relevant for their businesses. So that sharing that we do in EO is really opening up ideas for members, like what their next business would be, or how to future-proof their business from future regulation, really looking for those opportunities.
One of the things that I've been struck by is the way in which members of EO are really focused on mental health, focused on having a positive mindset, a growth mindset, but also airing times when they're not feeling great, times when they're in a dark place. I've interviewed so many amazing members, entrepreneurs who have talked about that, and the role of like having peers and forum mates who can help you through those difficult times. I literally just interviewed someone else earlier today who, she said, member of EO, and she said that it being in her forum inspired her to patch things up with her father she'd been estranged from for 35 years. So talk a little bit about what you've observed and how you've seen members kind of take on the role of mental health.
Yeah, I think COVID was a really stark example because members were facing all these business problems for sure, like massive, I've lost my clientele, I've lost my contract. I mean, massive business problems, but how a lot of our members dealt with that was by taking care of their own mental health first, because I think most of our members are smart enough and have the resources and know how to access resources to figure out, okay, I'm going to need this loan, or I'm going to do this on cash. But you can't make those decisions if you're not in the right mental space. And that is really where the support from other members really comes in. And you'll see a member share, like, this is the amazing thing. People meet each other at an in-person event, and they've known each other over the years. We were all locked down at home during COVID, and all they have is WhatsApp and Zoom calls. And so they'll post on their WhatsApp, oh my gosh, I have to lay off 12 of my staff today. I can't believe I have to do this. And then someone will chime in, I actually did that 5 years ago. It's the worst day of my life, and here's how you're going to get through it. And just knowing that there are other people who've been through the same thing really helps entrepreneurs do what they know they need to do, but just with that extra speed, care, compassion, not delaying, not going around in circles, like, okay, I got to do it. And that clarity and the support you get to face, really difficult times, I think has just helped everybody thrive through very, very trying circumstances.
Carrie, this has been such a pleasure talking to you. I know we're running short on time. I want to wrap things up with the question I always ask. I'm a big fan of gratitude. I'm a big fan of expressing gratitude publicly, especially maybe to those that we don't get to all that often. So, if you look around at your peers and contemporaries or mentors, however you want to define that, who do you respect? Who do you admire? Who are some people that you would want to publicly acknowledge for helping you along in your journey?
Sure. So there's something called the O family. So there's YPO, the Young Professionals Organization. There's also one called CEO, which is a group of YPO members. And both of those CEOs in the O family really reached out to me and helped me as peers and mentors. So there's Jennifer Lehman Wang from CEO, who has virtually the same job as me, like someone who actually has the same job. And she's just been terrific to go to lunch to and realize that, oh, it's not just us who's crazy. This is just the way the job is. And then Scott Mordell as well from YPO was a great help. And I don't think I have thanked them publicly for just kind of embracing me as I got into this world, because there are people who worked in this O world 10, 20 years, and I was definitely an outsider. They were very much kind of forum sharing and helpful to me. Really there's someone else I would just love to thank, who probably is thanked by many people, but never thanked enough. And that is Christina Harbridge, who's a member right there in EO, San Francisco. She's a legend in her own right in terms of what she's accomplished in her business, in her art, in her, you name it, just someone you need to interview. But I definitely had a chip on my shoulder when I came to EO that I wasn't a good enough public speaker, because there are so many, someone gets on the stage and they've blown them away. I'm like, oh my God, I can't do, like, how, I'm a CEO. I wasn't hired to be a public speaker. And I went to a Women of EO event in Napa Valley. And on day one, Christina Harbridge gave us all public speaking training. And I was like taking my notes and like trying to learn how to do it. And I didn't realize that I was supposed to be giving a keynote at the end of the Women of EO until day one.
They didn't told you?
Well, I thought it was going to be a panel. I thought I was just going to like comment, but then like the word keynote kept, I'm like, wait a second. So I literally took out Christina's notes. Okay, I can do this. I can put us in the moment. I can tell a very specific story. I can make it come to life. I can be real. And I just wanted to do so well for the women, for that group, for EO. And I gave this speech of my life where I just had never, I was like on a trapeze without a net, just, okay, I'm going to lay it all out there. And it's terrifying, exhilarating. And Christina like ran up to me at the end of it. She's like, Carrie, you're like the best student ever. I can't believe you learned that, because I did follow all of her tips. And she's someone who's continued to work with me. I highly recommend, if you feel like you need to find a different level of speaking that's not necessarily, a how-to book, but how to be yourself. She was so good and so encouraging. So like the fact that I gave a speech that Christina thought was good, I'm like, oh, like I'm done.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, I interviewed Sean McGinnis, who was COO and president of YPO at the time a couple of years ago. Amazing guy. Loved him.
It's so gracious. I actually saw him 2 weeks ago
cool.
in his new role, and he continues to be that helper, that fan. He introduced me to someone like with this. He gave me like this great bio. I'm like, Sean, I'm not that good, but, just a really, really sweet peer, very, very supportive of everybody. He is,
and one of the things I was struck by that I think it was in my interview with him where he talked about the cooperation that happens at YPO EO level. They could be seen as competitors, but they collaborate on so many different things, mentorship and things like that. So that's really cool to see.
Yeah, we do.
Carrie, this has been wonderful. Where can people go to learn more about you and connect with you and learn more about Entrepreneurs Organization?
Sure. We are at www.eonetwork.org. So just EO Network. And there's information there about how to find your local chapter, how to find out more about us. And very much it's a local organization. So it's about getting you in touch with who entrepreneurs are near you. So you can join a local network, get some local support, and then go from there. Then the whole world opens up and you can find an EO member anywhere on the planet.
Absolutely. And accelerator program, I put in a plug for that as well, which I went through, spent 3 years in that program, pivoted multiple times in that period of time. Great for businesses that are getting started or that are around $250,000 in revenue, want to get above 7 figures. Wonderful organization as well and program within EO. Carrie, thank you so much.
Thank you, John. It's really been a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the Rising Entrepreneurs Podcast. This episode is powered by Rise 25. Please subscribe and check out future episodes.